by the commission.
So, Mr. Chair,
because again, I can see you actually agree with Mr. Majan.
in some cases,
Largely.
yeah. So,
In all the responses he made
yeah.
before us, yeah.
Mr. Chair, are we allowed to ask the follow-up questions now, or do we wait for...
Let's finish.
Let him finish.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, on the issue of course, the monies, I noticed Marjan did not give you the breakdown when it came to the ballot boxes for fresh presidential election.
Mm-hmm.
My argument is that based on the decision that we made and the circumstances that were so difficult at the time, we actually saved 19 million shillings, 19.5 million shillings, based on that decision that we took. And we've given the explanation and the background a bit on that. That's page 20, page 9, from page 18, 19 to 20.
Okay, proceed.
Mr. Chair, there was the issue of the security seals being delivered. This, we've also attached a bit of the evidence in terms of how, I call it, how we were played by the supplier. In program management, we call it strategic misrepresentation. They tell you we have capacity to do this and we're going to do it. So they win the tender. But then when it comes to actual work, you realize it's a problem. And by 2nd of August, 7 days to the election, we discovered we were short of the number of seals that we required. And we got ourselves in a very difficult situation. And we went out of our way to try to salvage the situation, including seeking support from Zambia, Ghana, South Africa, Electoral Commission to help us. So that's how we ended up with this Ramos company. Because they found us, we were in... I think they took advantage of the situation. At the time.
The bigger issue there, which still remains, is the matter of how the commission handled the late deliveries of the seals, the ones that came after the elections, and how up to now they haven't been formally received by the commission, and they are in the commission stores. They haven't been paid for. I'm sure that's an area which if you wanted to help us, you could, but it's not really important because we're dealing with the substantive CEO on the same.
I think it's fair enough, Mr. Chair. The position they took is, I think, it's a valid position. I was directly involved in terms of trying to rescue the situation, so I wouldn't pay if it came to that position, unless, of course, the Commission decides otherwise. Then transport services on page 22, Mr. Chairman. I've provided more context in terms of how we ended up with that situation. And if you compare this approach and the approach that we had in 2013, Mr. Chair, and you have both details. When we appeared before you, we talked about the transport support in 2013 election. And now we're talking about transport support in 2017. Our approach is slightly different. It's more organized and it's more accountable. So the question that maybe you may need to, what we needed to clarify is that, as much as the Auditor General is saying that it's not possible to have these awards being made almost on the same day, the facts are that we actually organized it that way. We advertised the tender on the same day. Then we organized, facilities for accommodation where officers were clustered in counties to go and work on the evaluation and come up with reports and awards, because we're also rushing against time. That was in June. So that's how you ended up having these things being done on the same day. And we provided guidelines to that.
Actually, again, on that issue, the only outstanding matter is the involvement of the officers from the county governments and national government in the procurement. That's the only issue there. So,
based on the guidelines, I'm not even sure whether they were actually involved, Mr. Chair.
That was the response of Mr. Majan.
I was told that, but when I look at, when I recall, I'm not very sure. Once you cluster them together, what it means is that officers from one county and the other county come together and help each other to resolve the issue. But also under normal circumstances, I don't think it's illegal to involve them, because I think the law allows that, to use other public officers to support you in procurement where you have a shortfall at the regional level. And this is usually national government officials, Mr. Chair, not county governments.
Well, maybe a quick one, Mr. Chair, because
yes.
this is, on page 19, you mentioned that of the ballot boxes, 21,000 of these were supposed to be made locally, and 19,900 were to be made in China. And as a result, there was a logistical expense of now airlifting those ballot boxes from China to Kenya. Why would we produce 21,000 locally and this 19,000 in China? Did the company not have capacity? And even if that company not have capacity, there was no one else in Kenya who had the capacity to produce these 19,900 ballot boxes, and they had to be airlifted all the way from China. And especially during a time when you're trying to create employment for our local vendors, local contractors.
I think it's a valid point, Mr. Chair. First of all, we have to proceed from the point of view that we had made a decision that for fresh presidential election, we are going to go direct procurement based on the previous contracts that we had signed with the suppliers under the open tender contracting. So when we found ourselves in this particular situation, realized the supplier told us that in the initial contract, what they actually did was, in as much as they produce ballot boxes locally, when it's bulk, they will do it in China because it's cheaper. And I think their margins are higher. That was according to them. And during the open tender, we asked the suppliers to also present to us samples. And we realized that most of the suppliers did not meet those specifications. So it meant that you only have to go to the supplier that had capacity. But in addition, I remember that when we got in that particular situation, we asked that question. And I think the minutes where the plenary is discussing it. And they are saying, because we presented and said, there were different types of molds. We have the bigger molds, and we have the one that is consistent with our specifications. For those ones, we're going to have 21. But for the former, we must agree to change the specification. And then, of course, the commission made that decision and said, no, we must standardize all of them, and we cannot go short of that. Also, legally, I think it makes sense in a country like ours. So we needed to standardize based on that particular decision, and that's why we stuck to that mold specification. And we allowed him now to give us a more efficient way of dealing with that particular situation.
Maybe, Mr. Chair, and this does not require the CEO's, Mr. Chiloba's response, but I think that we cannot produce ballot boxes. Just that simple rectangular ballot box in this country should really be a reason for us as members of parliament and as a country to be worried.
Yeah, just proceed.
I agree with you on that.
You can see I'm rushing you.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, I think most of these things I refer to Marjan's submissions.
Yeah. But they would ask you if there are gaps we need to fill insofar as Marjan's
and I would really encourage you that you look at my submissions, because there are places where I say I agree with you, but I want to emphasize further by providing this additional information.
Well, I've seen that.
So that is important for you to really look at this particular submission.
Can you conclude?
Mr. Chair, of course, then the last bit on that was the media, the procurement of media services. I want to associate myself with the submissions made by Tabitha extensively, but I've also provided a little bit more context. And one of the interesting context I wanted to mention is that the same question of the involvement of commissioners in procurement. This issue of media was discussed 5 times at a plenary. And every time you have a section of commissioners pushing you back, go and do this, bring it back, go remove this money. So basically the process became a little bit murky, to the extent that we told the vote education chair of the committee, we told them we've given up, and I don't think we're going to have media campaigns. The program that we wanted to run from January was not going to run just because of delayed decision making. So I've attached some of the minutes giving that particular context of decision making on the procurement for media services.
There was a feeling that Transcend, which had worked previously with yourselves, was pushed out. deliberately, and in its place, Scanad brought on board. What would you comment?
Actually, Chair, the other argument I've heard is that we pushed in Transit Media because we really wanted them to get the contract.
Yeah,
there was that other school of thought.
Yeah.
But the point is this: we used restricted tendering process, and when we shortlisted the firms, of course, Transit Media as well as Scanad participated, and they were the only two firms that passed the technical level. Now, Transit got 65%, I think, or so, very low marks at the technical level. Scanad got very high, 92%. Transit quoted very, very low, so they became the best of determining the final price. So eventually, when they did the evaluation, there was one when you rounded off the scores, you found that they were actually virtually tied. And we had experienced their issues of these firms. They like going to court, left, right, and center. They write to you letters. So the head of procurement looked at it and said, okay, the differences are point differences. And what you need to do is that you just round it off and give all of them the opportunity for purpose of a negotiation pursuant to Section 127 or something, or 131 of the Procurement Act. So that is how we ended up with that situation of a negotiation, not because we are favoring any of them. And by the way, Scanad, if you look at their records, they had also worked with the ECK. When Transit Media worked with the Commission, I was at the UNDP then, and UNDP is the one that signed the contract with Transit Media. So basically, you'll say, I gave them the contract, but I didn't know them that time. So at least now when they're coming to this, and I'm saying they lost fairly, I believe that they lost fairly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then there was the vexing question of rounding off the scores, and then relying on what Mr. Aura was calling statistical tie. We were yet to be convinced under what section of the law you are doing that. Yeah.
To add up to that, because we just handled that matter this week.
Yeah.
Ezra, in your position, even as a Kenyan, there is a company here that worked for you in 2013. There is no memo indicating they did anything wrong. Then there is another opportunity. Two companies pass technical evaluation. All of a sudden, Scanad or Scan Group scores very highly. And the other company that actually worked with you with no adverse memo anywhere scores very lowly. And actually one of the officers in IEBC told us the other day, this week, that it was based on creativity. And of course, you know, creativity is very subjective. About that slogan they came up with, Kenya First, and the other one, Niwewe Kusema. And they told us that on that basis alone, Scan had scored very highly. What, Bwana Ezra, even as a Kenyan, paying a premium even before you reevaluated the scope, because you were actually willing to pay a premium of 300 million, because Canada had quoted there about 700 million. Transit that had worked with you had quoted around 400 million. A gap of 300 million. Was it purely a good price in your assessment to pay for such subjective reasons?
And maybe, Mr. Chair, further answer that.
Yeah, finally, yeah. On that.
The initial contract was they were supposed to carry out media campaigns for 12 months. But the contract was done and signed for 4 months. However, there is no significant change in the amount of in the prices. So are you trying to tell us that a media campaign that you do for 12 months and another that you do for 4 months, the pay is almost the same?
Mr. Chair, on the first question about having a Kenyan company work for you before, all those things actually, you put them in the technical evaluation criteria. And if you look at the technical evaluation criteria, experience is very, very important. So what we are saying is that according to the evaluation committee, given the scores, which I think it was 70% or 80% on the technical scores, according to the evaluation committee, they evaluated based on the same criteria, And as much as Transit Media had worked with us before, they did not meet that criteria. The CEO cannot make, the accounting officer cannot make a decision to award a contract on the basis of past experience. You must follow the law, which is there's an evaluation committee that adjudicates that process and makes recommendations. Maybe in future they may need to open up with very specific criteria. But in this case, Mr. Chair, even where we sat, we thought it was a fair game. And when the things were pricing, and when they went to the negotiation, Transit Media had quoted, I think, 477 million in the initial proposal. The other Scan Group had quoted about 700 million. They were given opportunity to negotiate on the same terms. Transit Media, I think, retained 430 million. Scan Group came to around 350 million. 100 million difference. Again, that is the choice. They were given an opportunity, but they could not defend that position. And I also add by saying that my own experience with the Transit Media, in 2013, when we gave them the contract, they gave us a figure of a certain sum of money. When they started the campaign, they realized the cost was going up beyond what they had been contracted for. They had to go back to the commission to ask for more money. So in the 2013, I think they learned that you don't just, because they said there's half time, I mean, the campaign has moved from 4 months to 2 months, so you do it by 50%. That's what they did, from 400 to 200 million. Then they lost it up. So in this case, I think they were a bit more pragmatic, but they still lost because they quoted much less. I know there's a court process on this matter, but that's a subject of another day. But to answer your question, this discussion was had at the commission. First of all, the question they kept on asking us, do we really need this media campaign? As a person who had been at the commission for a long time, and every Kenyan knew at that time that we were having a problem with communication. Our media engagement was nowhere closer to what was expected of the Electoral Commission. And we came up with an approach we called integrated media support. In fact, it was integrated media and communication support, which meant that we needed to engage media, we needed to have media campaigns at a specific time, but then there are other aspects of communication that will be costed, but which are not necessarily media campaign for purposes of the election. So if you look at the period that we had, we knew that the campaigns will start from, actually the initial tender was supposed to be from April to the, I think, a month after election, because you need to engage the citizens after the, we were to engage the citizens after the August 8th election. But all the advertising was to be concentrated there. But the rest of the time was going to be PR. PR is always on a need basis, not on an everyday campaign, everyday engagement. So when you look at the costing, it is about the cost of advertising for the media campaigns that were thematically driven, whereby the time duration was not an issue at the time.
In that case, Mr. Chair, if the cost of advertising was thematic, as you're saying, I thought you pay for, if, for example, you're paying for advertising, you're paying for, say, TV coverage, you're paying for newspaper ads. It is about how many minutes you get on the media. So if it is 12 months, of course, the time I expect would be shorter than if it is 4 months. Is that not the case?
I'm trying to, if I understand you well, when you do advertising for a specific purpose, if you're doing advertising for purposes of, for example, voter registration has a start, has an end. So you have to strategically position your media campaign. But when you realize that you're already carrying on voter registration and the media campaign has not started, it may mean you change strategy, which includes the offer I gave you of only advertising once per day. I can convert it, I'll advertise it twice per day, in the morning and in the evening. And it also depends as to when you're going to advertise. Is it prime time or is this? So those are the things that inform the costing of the campaign.
Want us to move now? Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm coming to the conclusion.
Please do. I'll only give you 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's enough, Mr. Chair. The conclusion I want to present before you, Mr. Chair, is this. I'll start on page 25, where I have section C, general observations. In order to assist this committee to understand some of the decisions on procurement matters within the Commission, I have analyzed relevant plenary minutes as provided in a summary form, the key decision, and that is Annex 18. What I call the anatomy of decisions on major procurements at the Commission. And the idea to do this, Mr. Chair, is that so no one should come back and say they never knew anything or they were not involved.
The point is made.
Yeah. So yeah. Number 76, we are saying, with respect to the fresh presidential election, the Commission on 4th of September 2017 approved the proposal to undertake relevant procurements through direct procurement due to time constraint. That was not there, but then I've attached that. In conclusion, Chairman and honorable members of the committee, what I sought to show was that each of the audit queries has an explanation that is logical and evidence-based. Each of those audit queries. That evidence has been placed before you by myself and in some cases by other witnesses who appeared here. But most importantly, context has been provided to explain these issues. I solely believe that the story would have been much different had I been availed the opportunity to participate in the audit process. I would have rendered my support to the independent audit, and most of these queries will not have arisen. When it comes to audits, Mr. Chairman, I'm always guided by the words of Justice Lopes, where he says, it is the duty of an auditor to bring to bear on the work he has to perform that skill, care, and caution which a reasonably careful, cautious auditor would use. What is reasonable skill, care, and caution must depend on the particular circumstances of each case. An auditor is not bound to be a detective or, as was said, to approach his work with suspicion or with a foregone conclusion that there is something wrong. He is a watchdog and not a bloodhound. He is justified in believing trade servants of the company or the organization in whom confidence is placed by the company. He is entitled to assume that they are honest and rely upon their representations, provided he takes reasonable care. What happened in my case, Mr. Chairman, was that a few members of the Commission decided to send me on compulsory leave in order to invite the Auditor General to undertake a comprehensive audit. But instead, what happened was a continuation of an engineered internal audit, which they used to frame a narrative that there was something wrong at the Commission and that the CEO was solely responsible. The internal audit was actually to preempt the Auditor General's findings. When the Auditor General came up with the draft report in July 2017, I'm fully aware that some of the members of the Commission released the same draft to the media with the sole purpose of reinforcing their misconception about the Secretariat. This explains why we are here, Mr. Chair. The loss of 9 billion at IEBC will mean that there was absolutely no money for any of the critical procurements at the Commission in the period under review. Nothing could be further from the truth. Inasmuch as I did not participate in the audit process, I wish to correct the notion that has been created that 9 billion was lost. I am aware in June 2018, the Auditor General pointed out that the Commission had procured goods worth 9.2 billion through direct procurement. According to the draft report, the Commission was required to justify the direct procurement. And following clarification by the management team, the Auditor General was able to drop that issue. That's why you do not find that issue in the final report. So if people talk about 9 billion, Mr. Chair, the history was in the draft audit report. And amid the governance crisis the Commission faced the last 6 months to the elections, I want to confirm that I remain steadfast, focused, and resilient enough to ensure that election materials and services are procured in accordance with the law. Under my leadership, we were able to swim against the strong tide and carry out the elections. As you retreat to write your report, I want you to appreciate the fact that there was and there still is a governance crisis at the Commission. We must be rational and honest enough to address it once and for all. The following are some of the questions you need to consider. Does the Commission require full-time or part-time commissioners? Should we have executive commissioners modeled along Ghana, or should we have non-executive chairman, for example, with a powerful office of the CEO, just as it is in Botswana? What are the specific limits of decision-making on procurement for commissioners. What does oversight role of commissioners mean in the context of segregation of responsibilities on procurement as envisaged by the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act as well as the Public Financial Management Act? My greatest lesson, Mr. Chairman, my greatest lesson thus has been the weight that comes with the leadership in an institution which is in a constant political bullseye. And the tenacity of individuals appointed to these offices is what ultimately defines that institution. And thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I will allow you members, but just before you come in, let me just get some clarification. Mr. Chiloba, this internal audit that you say was engineered to fast track your removal from the commission, who did it? If you could just answer me straight away on that, yeah.
The people who carried out internal audit were internal auditors.
I see the names here.
Yeah.
So are you saying that they are all officers of the IEBC?
They're officers of the IEBC in the internal audit department.
Okay. And if you say the audit was purposefully meant to incriminate you, so to speak, does it mean that these officers who are involved owe their allegiance to other forces, either within the commission or outside the commission?
I believe they're working under instructions of some commissioners, and I will explain to you the context a little bit.
Yes.
That on 6th, I had gone on leave sometimes last year, Mr. Chair, and when I came back on the 5th of January, we had engagements at the commission. Then at some point, the chairman told me he had some questions to ask me.
Okay.
I said, oh, fair enough, bring them so that we deal with them. So he came with about 7 questions around procurement, and we were able to respond to those questions. Then we had plenary in April, and in that plenary, we had discussions around those queries. Then eventually what happened is that because there was a disagreement, there were 3 commissioners who said, I think the CEO has adequately explained the issues. Then 3 other commissioners, including the chairman himself, did not really express their view. Then one of them just said, take this thing to the internal audit.
Okay.
So that's how it landed at the internal audit desk. And if you follow that internal audit story, Mr. Chair, is that at every step, the chair will stand up and announce, I'm happy with the progress of the internal audit. I'm happy with the progress. And I was never given an opportunity to even answer to any query until they converted those findings, purported findings, into disciplinary grounds without allowing me the opportunity to sit down with my colleagues to be able to respond to those internal audit queries. So that's why I say it was askew, Mr. Chair.
In a nutshell, Mr. Chiloba, you have issues with the professionalism and impartiality of the team that composed the internal audit.
Very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay. And secondly, the commissioners that you have continued to refer to as having had an intention of throwing you out of the commission, what reason would you advance as having been the motivation for them to see you out of the commission? You specifically.
Chair, I think I would say that first is the conflict of visions. I referred to that issue, the conflict of visions, which basically means there's a certain way that, given the experience that I had at the commission, we saw the solution to the commission problems and how we were going to work around that. And that's why we were very systematic and methodical in terms of how we were working. But then when the new commissioners came, they thought that I was denying them the opportunity to exercise their powers. And they will refer to, we want to change this commission, but when you ask specifically, what is it that you want to change? No one will tell you, Mr. Chair. So that is point number 1. Point number 2, Mr. Chair, I think is also because of the leadership capabilities. I'm a very forthright person, very rational in that matter. And sometimes that can be interpreted to be too aggressive. And given my age, Mr. Chair, when you're in the office and people keep on saying the young man, and yet I'm the CEO of the organization, they refer to you as the young man, that is very demeaning, Mr. Chair. So I thought there was also some perspective about the leadership capabilities and the competition around that. So then eventually I wouldn't know whether there was any external pressure or not, but then that one I think we'll have to do a further inquiry into it.
And finally, on my part, would you therefore want to say that you are then questioning the integrity of the individual commissioners of the IEBC?
Without a fear of contradiction, Mr. Chair, I do question that.
You do question?
I worked with them, and I supported them, and I trusted that they were new, and so we're helping each other, and they're going to learn. But given what has emerged, and I think, Mr. Chair, there are a lot of questions to be asked, to ask about their integrity and their capabilities.
And this is about all of them or some of them? And
Mr.
now
Chair,
let's confine ourselves to the three who still remain in office.
I mean, I see a lot of intellectual dishonesty among all of them, Mr. Chair.
Among all of them?
Among all of them, but more particularly the chairman himself.
And in your view, therefore, they do not deserve to continue holding those offices?
Mr. Chair, if the Kenyans want that they continue to be in that office, that is to them. If this committee wants, that is really with them. If they want to stay, really they have to prove that they worth staying in that particular office. But given the experience that I've gone through, they'll say whatever they want to say, and they know that there's a problem at the commission.
So you believe that the credibility of the commission, as currently constituted, is beyond redemption?
Mr. Chair, if you look at the last paragraph
Yes.
of my submission, I've alluded to the fact that, yes, there's a leadership issue, but the people who lead are as more important, perhaps even more important than the rules and oversight and the regulations you put in place as checks and balances. The people factor really matters, Mr. Chair.
Okay, fine. Honorable Koske, then Honorable Nyoro, and finally Honorable. Just one issue, if possible.
Mine might not be an issue, but observation generally. I've looked at your submissions, and some few things are very clear. The chairman and the commissioners seeks to influence the award of tenders to particular companies without full disclosure. Number two is about the commissioners going out of their way to establish cost of goods and services even before bids are floated. This is something that is very serious, and I think, Mr. Chair, we need to sit down as the leaders of this country and look at how we are going to bring on board commissioners who don't have interest of maybe benefiting themselves, but bringing to the country free, fair, and transparent elections. Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Nyoro.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. My fellow young man, I have a few observations also and maybe queries. In your assessment as the CEO of IEBC then, do you think the Kenyan taxpayer got value for money, given you expended around 40 billion Kenya shillings? We have queried several issues in this committee in relation to that election. One around like transport, road is being paid 450,000 per day to transport election materials, of seals that on shelf price is around 5 bob being purchased at 40 shillings. I'd want to hear from you whether you think you can stand the test of time, if indeed you are the CEO then, whether Kenyans got value for money. But more importantly, you have ably put it that commissioners had undue influence in terms of procurement. From where you sit and where you were, do you think the commissioners were doing so to safeguard public funds, or were they doing so because of Nakura Nini? Do you think they were doing so to profit themselves? Do you think they were in any way connected to the suppliers who ended up getting those tenders. And one of the reasons of asking such, you've just said about integrated media campaign, and you've told us that there were 5 meetings in regards to that particular tender. First of all, entirely, after the end of the 5 meetings, did you end up contradicting the technical opinion of the officers vis-a-vis the commissioners?
Finally, hopefully.
Finally, hopefully,
Yes.
Chair.
Yes.
In my opinion, you've advanced the issue about restricted tenders and even direct procurement. And clearly you had all the time in the world because elections come every 5 years. And you've tried to show us the reasons why. Do you think this issue of direct procurement and restricted tendering, people were just buying time, maybe including yourself, so that we run out of time in terms of Kenya and elections and IEBC, so that we can invoke this particular methods of procurement, especially to profit either yourself or the commissioners or the people involved?
Honorable Kimani.
I should also start by saying, fellow young man, the issue, I realize on page 26 of your submission that you say that the purpose of the internal audit seems to have been to prove that the CEO was solely responsible. My question would be, how then would it be? Either the CEO and the commissioners are jointly responsible, or that the commissioners only are responsible? Because at point one issue of procurement, the price of SIM cards that costed 173 shillings each for thousands and thousands of SIM cards. Mr. Chair, this is common knowledge about the price of a SIM card in this country. So are you saying that now they want you to be solely responsible, or would you tell us that now for such issues, then it's just you to be solely responsible, but you should be jointly responsible with the commissioners? I can say, Mr. Chair, that I clearly see a great conflict of interest in the way the commissioners ran the commission. One of the principles of management is separation and segregation of duties between the board and the secretary, to call it like that. But as the CEO, did you ever raise these issues? There is an oversight committee of the National Assembly. So did you come and say, I am not being let to do my job by these commissioners because we can say comfortably that if you hold 5 meetings to review the procurement of media services, definitely that procurement process is wrong. And I could wonder, why then did you have to have an evaluation? Why did you have the secretary in the first place? But really, as a CEO, did you raise these issues? Whom did you raise them with? And did you have to wait until things went so wrong? And as you're saying, you are put under the bus that now you're coming to raise them.
All of them?
Quite a bit,
And
okay.
in summary, please.
Mr. Chair, I think I should start with the last one. Yes. In terms of raising concerns, I think that's where we started with when I tried to talk about the governance context and where we had meetings and would register my reservation in the manner in which the commission was conducting. And even the chair himself confirmed here. He said, no, the CEO told us we have no role in procurement. That's what he said. But for me, Mr. Chair, I had raised that concern. First of all, they were only 6 months old in office before the election. We wanted to ensure that there's an election going on. We updated them in terms of how far we had gone in terms of preparations. And of course, these norming issues were there. And we hoped that they were going to adjust. But immediately after the election, then things turned around. But I know that at some point, even the chair himself wrote a letter on a procurement matter to the cabinet secretary. And the cabinet secretary wrote back, instead of responding to him, he responded to me and copied the chair and reminded him that, reminding us that, the role of the accounting officer is already stated in law, and that is how we need to address it. And further to that, Mr. Chair, I think there are minutes as well, sometimes in February or March, where when we raised this concern, the chairman himself wrote to the head of public service asking for clarification about the role of the secretariat and the commissioners, because he was saying that there were difficulties, and he had been referred to the Mwongozo policy framework. And he came back in the meeting and said he did that because he does not think Mwongozo framework works for IEBC. We need something else. You see, that tells you the context of how we're operating in. And had I been allowed to participate in the audit, I knew the occasion was going to come. But for 1 year, almost, I've been out. So this is the first formal engagement I'm having to actually talk about these issues. So they were going to come at some point. The price of SIM card, I also want to put it on record that the SIM cards that we had were not ordinary SIM cards. They were not ordinary SIM cards. They were specialized SIM cards. I think, who is ICT? APN SIM cards, in the sense that they're only configured to read on particular servers. Those SIM cards were deactivated in terms of they could not provide you the voice service, so that you cannot call anyone, listen on it. You could not get an SMS on it. And they were only configured for purposes of the KIMS technology. And if you ask the vendors themselves, they'll say, no, those are not ordinary SIM cards. They're specialized SIM cards. In terms of...
Mohati didn't seem to know that.
No, I actually saw that
Yeah.
on TV. Then I asked him, what did you mean? That we thought it was about the size. So, yeah. But I'm aware that I think they provided more evidence in that regard, Mr. Chair.
But maybe a quick interjection there, Mr. Chair, if you could allow me. The ICT director is one who procured really or gave the technical, because the CEO, you are a lawyer, you're manager, you are not a technical person here. But the technical person said they were ordinary. So I'm surprised that you have additional information than the technical person who asked for the SIM cards. And so that I don't interject you again, on the issue of management, apart from you raising it in the minutes of the plenary, of course we will not agree with you. Did you have external mechanisms, like get this message out there, that the reason why these things are happening is because these people are interfering with this procurement process?
No, I did not do that with the external mechanism, given that the timelines were very short and we needed to get ready for the elections. But as I was saying, time was going to come when these things were going to be discussed, after all. On the question of direct procurement and the strategy around that, I can say it here again without fear of contradiction. When we planned for the elections, one of the things I said to Parliament was, give us the money, we spend it, and we'll be able to account for it. Now, we were given the money, then other things also happened along the way. We never knew that we were going to change the commission. And to me, the change of commissioners had a far-reaching implications in terms of the order of planning and procurement for elections. Why? Because the commission that conceived how the elections were going to be like had been removed. So who is this now running the election? So when you go to that particular point, we have decisions, okay, we want to participate in procurement. Before you proceed, bring us the specifications we approve. And the process of developing technical specifications is not an easy one. Sometimes you have to get external actors to come and participate. Then you take the specifications, sometimes they say, no, now do this. For example, the ballot papers. We approve the specification of ballot papers because it's a strategic material. With the previous commission, that's why we tendered it the year before. But when the new commissioners came, they said, bring us those specifications. They even added more specifications, which meant even the price goes up. So these are some of the things that you find that you lose a lot of time trying to discuss the issues. You end up into a situation of direct procurement. And direct procurement also affected by vendor wars. Vendor wars are clear. People trying to influence the tender through many ways. Some go to court, so they stole the process. And it led us here, but not because that as the CEO of the accounting officer, I deliberately delayed. At no point did I ever do that. I only remember one occasion when, after some of those vendors were defeated in terms of trying to influence me, I met one and I didn't know he was one of the vendors, and he said, there's a problem with you. No one seems to know where your interests lie, so that they see how to influence you. It is how professional we were that kind of created even some of these situations where they're saying, no, the CEO seems to be the difficult guy to deal with. Mr. Chair, Nyoro,
we shall leave that for today, but then
a bid floating. There's a question here. Yes, I think value for money.
So this vendor, Mr. Chiloba,
Yes.
this vendor who was talking about you being difficult, was he attempting to influence you?
Oh, he had given up.
Did he try bribing you?
No. It was after the fact. He'd given up about this issue. So it was not. They had lost. We had already signed the contract.
Okay.
So.
Are you trying to say had you not signed the contract, then it would have been a different issue?
Okay. No. Please conclude.
Okay, I'll deal with that. Mr. Chair, there's some important question about the management, whether the situation would have been different had I not been in this particular situation. One of the things I would have decided the Commission does is that to come before this committee and explain the situation that led to some of those decisions that we made in procurement and stand by those decisions. What I find unfair is they made decisions, then they ran away from those decisions. And to me, that is bad leadership. So what I stand for is that the commissioners and the CEO, we were in a meeting, we discussed these things, and we said, okay, this is how it's going to be like. In as much as we raised concern, agree to that fact. So, but coming here and changing that position, I find that quite unfair, Mr. Chairman. Okay. Yeah, in terms of value for money, Mr. Chair, I would say is that when you go for open tender, in terms of procurement, first principle, open tender is the most preferred mechanism. The cost of because of competition, the cost of items, they're manageable. I mean, you can get really greater value for money. But as you narrow down, what happens is that those circumstances that are leading you to direct procurement are the ones which actually also affect the cost of the items that you want to procure. When you say it's urgent, it may mean it's also urgent for the supplier to be able to mobilize and be able to service you. So it means he will put that price on you. So as much as possible, we need to avoid direct procurement. And that can only happen through proper planning, advanced planning for the elections, and addressing any potential gaps or risks well in advance. And in this case, as a country, I think we did not do very well because we waited until too late to be able to correct some of the things, and we got ourselves in trouble. Mr. Chair, I'll say one last thing. You asked me about the integrity of some of these commissioners. Mr. Chair, I'll give you a good example. When we were procuring ballot papers, remember the issues we had, Alugrea, no Alugrea, and we kept on changing, going to court and stuff like that. At some point, we sat as plenary, because we're in a crisis. If we don't have ballot papers, we might need to postpone the election. But then we said we must have a solution to this. So a section of the commission said, no, we need to change away from Alugrea. And I think at some point, the chair, who was the advocate for changing from Alugrea, pushed for the cancellation of the tender. At that time, I think the matter was still at the Court of Appeal. So a resolution that he obtained was, we've agreed to abandon Alugrea Presidential so that we look for another supplier. And at this time, we even now started asking ourselves, who would be the suppliers for this particular ballot if we are abandoning Alugrea? We don't have a criteria of getting to them. So I think a number of firms were floated. We discussed that. And then I was told the resolution of the commission was, please proceed and start the process of fresh procurement for presidential ballot papers for a local or an international company. After that decision, Mr. Chair, I went to the office, but chairman called me. I think I had not left the boardroom, so I was summoned to his office, So the two of us. So when I get there, he introduces to me another firm that was not discussed at the plenary. So
Which firm was this?
there was a company called Reflon.
Yeah?
Reflon.
Spell it, please. R.
Reflon.
A local company?
No, it's a South African company, I think.
South African.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
So he gives me documents, and he tells me, go look into this. 2 days later, he sends me a memo asking me how far I've gone in terms of implementing the commission decision to procure an international company to offer ballot papers. And I called the chairman. I told him, I don't think the plenary said an international company. It says international local. So that means options, it's open. So he changed that particular position and said, okay, an alternative company. So when you talk about integrity...
So when he told you to go look into this, what did you understand by that?
I understood...
What did you understand that to mean?
I understood that I needed to contact Reflon immediately. And that's why he was also writing a memo to me, trying to find out how far I've gone in doing that.
Did you contact Reflon?
We did not. And the reason we did not contact, of course, one is that...
contact, not contract.
No, I did not. Because I found that quite...
Did you tell him you will not...
I did not tell him. I just carried the documents. I went back to my office. Then I started reflecting, wondering what had happened. I tried to find out, to sense from the other commissioners whether they were aware about this thing. And I did not get the information. But 2 days later, the Court of Appeal reinstated Al Ghurair. So that solved the matter.
So your conclusion from that encounter with the chairman is that he was trying to influence you to contract Reflon company to supply these materials.
There can be no other explanation.
Okay. I thought we had close to Bunyoro and Honorable Kimani.
He's giving us more new information. Was that the genesis of your push and pull between yourself and the chair? And beyond this printing tender, is there any other that you may think that chairman had interest in terms of himself benefiting?
I wouldn't know whether actually that was the beginning of our differences, but I think our differences had began a bit earlier. You know, where basically we're looking at the role of the chair, the role of the commissioners at the secretariat. I think we had a lot more things. So these others were factors exacerbating the situation of disagreement. But I wouldn't really know whether that is actually the interesting, the thing that drove me to this in this situation. In terms of other companies, I cannot recall if there was any other that he was directly involved, except that when he convened a meeting in my absence, trying to persuade commissioners that we need to listen to this particular vendor, see whether they can supply us schemes. And the last one, I think the issues around his former law firm. I wouldn't know whether he had a hand in it or not. But what happened is that we had shortlisted firms to provide legal services to the commission through pre-qualification. So his former law, he was actually then part of the law firm. So when it came to the commission, he claimed to have resigned. But when work was being distributed, his law firm was also given work. But I did not fully participate in that decision of giving work to law firms. So because petitions were being filed immediately after the August 8th election, so most of these things were post facto. You hear a matter has been filed in court, so you have to get a lawyer from that particular place or strategically placed to go and deal with the matter. So when the issues came to me, I noted there were certain cases that had been awarded to law firms. So I came across a letter, a draft letter, awarding the contract to Cotton Company. And I called chairman himself and asked him, whether he was aware. He said he was not aware. And I told him, this is not fair. It's not necessarily fair. I told him there's going to be a problem on this matter. You see, it's already fait accompli. They're already working. I'm supposed to sign off. Then he says, but I resigned. I said, yeah, you resigned maybe legally, but politically it's not going to work for you. There's a potential conflict of interest here. That's going to be a problem. So, and I left it with him. I went ahead and signed, because on legal matters, somebody has taken a case, then that becomes, you cannot withdraw and give it to someone else midway. You're complicating matters. What he failed to do, Mr. Chair, is that he never disclosed to the other colleagues that, there was a potential conflict of interest, his law firm having been awarded work. And that became an issue. Of course, shortly thereafter, things happened. I was forced to go on leave. Then the following year, again, I went on another leave, then suspension, then sacking.
Okay. So we have to close now.
It's very brief, Mr. Chair. There was a memo that was done to you asking about how far you've gone in the procurement of an international firm. There were minutes of a primary that said that the procurement would be done to the supplier would be either local or international. Are those documents available for specification, both the memo and the minutes? In your opinion, should the commissioners, especially the chairman, have direct contact with potential vendors? Is that how it's done, even just tendering, that I'm a commissioner, I can say, look into this, even if that particular plenary meeting, that decision had not been made?
One is that I have the documents. I have the documents, and we can make them available. On the question of having direct contact with the vendors as a chairman, I think you have to look at the motivation. Sometimes you might meet vendors, you go for a conference on ICT and you meet vendors, or they come in the country. No big deal with that. And my problem with that approach that he had given me was, we had just finished a meeting where we had talked about even names of the vendors. But he never disclosed to us that there was another vendor somewhere that he intended us to consider. To me, that was a problem.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we've now come to an end of this meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chiloba, and your team for taking time to come before us and clarify these issues. Yeah, I wish you all the best. We shall be making a termination after considering all the facts which are already before us and which will come before us here in the next week. Thank you. Any comment? Any further comment?
Chair, I just want to appreciate that you gave me this opportunity to come here. I know it's been reported a lot in the media about me and, created a monster out of me. But I can tell you that I've been faithful in my work in service of this country. And the fact that I've been given an opportunity to speak about these things freely, honestly, I want to say I appreciate. And I want to wish you all the best as you write your report, and be as objective as much as possible. God bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.